So the other fitness test we can do is the Ergocycle test. This one's not necessarily better or worse than the step test. It's just a different way of measuring aerobic fitness like the step test does. We might want to use this test, for example, if our client is a cyclist versus somebody who typically likes to walk or jog. They might prefer this method. Another reason is if somebody has a previous knee injury, or maybe if they have excess body weight, they might find the step test too difficult, or they might not be able to last as long as they should. And so we might want to use this method to either prevent knee injury or knee strain or excess muscle fatigue. Once again, we want to measure aerobic endurance here, not muscle endurance. So if somebody's stopping because their legs are cramping up, it might be a question of muscle fatigue, and you might have to redo the test another time. And so what we have here is your typical Ergocycle that you'd find in a typical testing lab, exercise physiology lab. And so there's a couple of parts about the bike that we need to note and adjust before we get started on the test. The first thing you'll want to note is there's a screen right here. The screen will give us two really important pieces of information. The first is the pedaling speed that Clara is going to be doing. This test actually dictates a specific pedaling speed so that we can know exactly how much wattage she's producing. And so for this test, it's 50 revolutions per minute. It's actually quite a bit slower than you'd probably normally bike, but it's important that as the tester, you're constantly taking a look at that gauge to make sure she's staying as close to 50 as possible. The other important piece of information it gives us is the test time. And so you'll be taking heart rate every minute during this test, but the stages also last 3 minutes, potentially 4, and we'll go over that in class, why it might vary. However, with just my one watch, if I'm using my watch to count that 10-second count for her heart rate, I might get confused between the two times. So I typically recommend using the time on the clock as your overall test time, and then maybe using a watch or your stopwatch to do the 10-second count for the heart rate if you're getting confused between the two. So we have that gauge. And then finally, we also have a resistance, which is set right here and is adjusted with this knob. So turning it clockwise increases the resistance, the KP. Turning it counterclockwise reduces the resistance. You'll notice right now, if I turn the knob, nothing happens to the pendulum. Your client actually has to be pedaling for you to see that change being reflected. So you can't necessarily adjust it and know where it's going to be until they start pedaling, and then you can adjust it accordingly. Regardless of whether the client is male or female, the starting workload for everybody is 0.5 kp, so it would be this notch right here. It's very, very light, almost feels like no resistance at all, and that also serves as your warm-up as well. Based on Clara's physiological response to that workload, so in other words, how much her heart rate increases or decreases, that will dictate how hard the test is going to be for the rest of the procedure. Unlike the step test, it's the same cadence for all males, the same cadence for all females. Here, her protocol might vary compared to another client's based on how her heart rate responds. To make sure we actually test what we want to test, in this case, aerobic endurance or aerobic fitness, we got to make sure the bike is properly fitted. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can have your client line up next to the seat, and typically we will say it should be the height of your hip. Typically, I'll maybe start with this, but my go-to, or the way I really like to make sure, is I'll have the client get on the bike and pedal a couple of times. And so Clara will step on. You'll also want to make sure that you adjust these as well so that she can also pull up with her feet, and it's not always a pushing motion using the hamstrings and the quads. But as Clara pedals very lightly, you'll notice there's still a slight bend in her knee, very slight, when the leg gets to the bottom. If there's too much of a bend in the knee, if the seat's too low, it's engaging the muscles too much, and you'll see she'll probably get lactic acid buildup in her quad, and she'll have muscle fatigue, which stops her from performing the test rather than aerobic endurance, which is what we're looking for. Like any other aerobic fitness test, Clara has the right to stop at any point. I'm going to stay in about this kind of range so I can monitor her condition, make sure she's breathing well, she's feeling comfortable, but if at any point she has cramps or she just wants to stop for the sake of stopping, or especially chest pain, then she can stop at any point. It's important that she remembers that. I'll be checking in with her probably every minute as well to make sure she's feeling okay. The other part of the bike that we might want to adjust is this dial right here, which can adjust the handlebars. So simply by turning it clockwise or counterclockwise, in this case counterclockwise loosens it, so I can have Clara hold onto it to where she feels is a comfortable position, and then I can retighten it. You want to make sure you tighten it firmly, otherwise when they start working harder and they really lean on it, the handlebars could give away and you might have an injury on your hands. So make sure you make it nice and tight so that that's not going to give out once she starts leaning on those handlebars. Throughout the entire test, Clara has to remain seated. So clients cannot stand, especially when that resistance builds up. They'll have the temptation to do so, but they do have to stay seated the whole time. Other than that, we're pretty much ready to go. We're going to measure the heart rate every minute. What I typically recommend is starting at about 45 seconds of the minute, finding the heart rate, either by palpation. In this case, Clara would flip her wrist on the handlebars like this, and I would do by palpation. Or depending on the noise level in the lab, you could also do auscultation. Some people or some clients might be easier to hear through auscultation than palpation. It'll depend on them, but I would check to see ahead of time so you're not trying to figure it out once the test has already started. A lot of times as well, some clients have a hard time sticking to 50 revolutions per minute just because it's a visual cue and they prefer an audio cue. And so you can easily use any kind of browser, just type in metronome, or if you have one on your phone already, an app, or we have some in the lab as well, you can click the metronome and it'll click at a beat of 50 revolutions per minute. And so that could be a cue. So you could tell your client, every time you hear a beat, I want your right foot to be at the bottom part of the pedaling cycle. And some people might prefer that as a system of cueing. All right. So with that being said, I would ask Clara if she's ready to go, if she had any questions about the protocol, and I would be ready with my login sheet to write down her heart rate. And without any further delay, I'll say whenever you're ready, Clara, you can start pedaling and we'll start the test. I'll adjust my resistance. Okay. There we go. So now I'm at about 0.5. So Clara would tell you that it's a pretty easy workload. Once I'm at 0.5, I can start my watch or start my clock so that I know how long she's been pedaling for. And every minute, I'm going to take the heart rate. And if I want, once again, provide that audio cue for Clara so that she can try and pedal to the beat if she prefers rather than looking at the screen. So you notice my positioning. I'm not too far. I'm still giving her space. But here I have great client contact. I can monitor her form, make sure everything's going OK. She can let me know really quickly. And we can just wait for that 1 minute to go around. All right, so getting ready now. I'll have you show me your wrist. Thank you. So I would make a note of her heart rate. That was just the first minute. Once again, I'll do that 2 more times. It's important at the end of a stage that we have a steady state heart rate, which means within 5 beats per minute. If that's not the case, I'll extend this stage by an extra minute, and then I would decide what the next working load would be by referring to the CSEP sheets in your notebook or on the slides in the PowerPoints of the course. So this would be just the first minute of the first stage. We're almost getting ready for our second reading now. It does keep you quite busy. You can't really leave your client for very long. You shouldn't be leaving your client at all. But you got to make sure you're close because those minutes will go by very quickly. Typically, by the end of the stage, you'll already have an idea of which workload you should be switching to based on how their heart rate's been going. So I'll have you show me your wrist again. Perfect. Once again, same as the last minute. So we'll wait the 1 more minute. And then based on that, it would change what her workload would be for stage number 2. It goes without saying as well that the 85% cutoff of the max heart rate still applies in this test. So you could potentially have 4 stages of cycling for this test. However, if Clara were to overcome that 85% max, then I would terminate the test as well. So remember that as the tester, you always have the right to terminate the test if you feel your client looks like they're struggling. They may choose to continue, but you can always ask them. It's also important at the end of the stage that you ask for the rate of perceived exertion as well to see how they're feeling. They might seem okay, the heart rate might show that they're okay, but they may feel quite strained or exhausted. And so that's always something to consider as well so that you know how your client might be doing. And the last heart rate. Perfect. So once again, we have steady state heart rate. Her heart adjusted quite well. I would increase the workload to the appropriate stage based on her heart rate, and then we would start the next stage, taking the heart rate every minute and moving so on and so forth until the termination of the test.